To the Two Casual MMA podcast, the podcast for the casuals from Two Casuals, and we are continuing the countdown of the greatest knockouts from the casual era of MMA. So we've had number 5, we've had number 4. If you haven't kept up to date, number 5 for me was Jorge Masvidal versus Ben Askren. Number 4 was Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya 2 in Miami. And today we've got our number 3. Well, my number 3 in the greatest knockouts of all time. And this is very, very monumental, this one. This is a really, really big moment. And I was telling people for months and months and months that this was coming. Maybe not this knockout of this magnitude, but I was telling people for ages that this was coming. And people thought I was idiotic for this. But I had a told you so moment. And it comes at UFC 232 between arguably the two greatest women mixed martial artists of all time. Cris Cyborg versus Amanda Nunes is my number 3 greatest UFC knockout in the casual era. Now, leading up to it, Cris Cyborg had a record of 20 wins, 1 loss. And that came in her very first fight in MMA. Obviously had 1 no contest as well, but after that, she was just destroying people left, right, and center and looked like, in fact, a cyborg. Looked absolutely unbeatable. Whilst on the other end of the scale, Amanda Nunes had a couple of losses at that point in time. But up until that point, she was beating people very, very violently. And she was making a real case for being the queen of women's MMA at that point in time. But there was one person left to the throne, and that was Cris Cyborg. And I remember at that point in time, Cris Cyborg was the favorite going into it, and rightfully so. Cris Cyborg was dismantling everybody that was put in front of her. And Amanda Nunes being a striker, it favored Cris Cyborg at the time, or what everybody thought, it favored Cris Cyborg. But in the lead up to it, and I remember for months, I was saying to some of my mates, I think Amanda Nunes is going to do her here. And I was getting laughed at, like, you are an absolute muppet. I'd been watching UFC for a good couple of years at that point in time, and people were laughing at me like I was fresh to the game, like really, really fresh to the game, and rightfully so. Cyborg looked unbeatable. She looked like a women's version of Khabib, but in the striking aspect, and it did sound ludicrous at the time to say, I think Nunes is going to beat her. Did I think what was to follow one of the most chaotic minutes in the history of MMA, period? I don't care if it's women's MMA. I don't care if it's male MMA. It was chaotic. It was back and forth for a little bit, but then Amanda just really, really took over. Did I see this sort of punishment coming? Absolutely not. The reason why it is the number 3 on this list is I believe it was Amanda Nunes' crowning moment. It solidified her as the greatest women's mixed martial artist of all time. When you dismantle someone of Cris Cyborg's magnitude and with Cris Cyborg's stature in the game and dismantle her in under a minute, there leaves no doubt that you are definitely the queen of women's mixed martial artists after that. But obviously since then, Amanda Nunes racked up a lot of wins, a lot of title defenses in 2 different weight classes, and solidified herself as the GOAT of women's MMA. But I feel like this fight against Cris Cyborg is the one that really, when you look back on it, this is the one in history that really solidified it. This is the turning point. This is the one where everybody was like, yes, she is here, the GOAT of women's MMA, Amanda Nunes. There's no more up in the air with, is Cris Cyborg the greatest? Is Ronda Rousey the greatest? Is Holly Holm potentially the greatest? No. Amanda Nunes, the lioness, is here to stay. She is the queen of women's MMA. And I can still remember watching it at UFC 232, and they're going back and forth with the striking. And I can still remember it's one of the most exciting moments that I've ever had of watching the UFC. Probably because I am a bit of an egotistical bastard, super stubborn, crazy defiant. And when Nunes hit her with that shot, with that rocked her, I was like, oh my God, I told you so. And just how she just had her buckled and she just swung for the hills with absolutely reckless abandonment. It was chaos, but it was beautiful chaos. This is what we love to see as mixed martial arts fans. Obviously, we do love the science behind the striking, but there's something crazy and wild about us all that we enjoy those moments of beautiful chaos. And this sequence between Amanda Nunes and Cris Cyborg was exactly that. It was beautiful chaos. And it just feels very fitting that it was this beautiful chaos that cemented somebody as not only just the greatest mixed martial artists in regards to women of all time, but one of the goats of the sport. And I feel like that was the crowning moment. And I feel like that's why it deserves a place in my top 3, not just my top 5. But women's mixed martial arts has come a hell of a long way in the last few years. And if I look back at the crowning moment of women's mixed martial arts, who is the GOAT? It was UFC 232. Cris Cyborg versus Amanda Nunes, and that knockout, which was absolute beautiful chaos. There you have it, gang. It was a great knockout. It was a great moment in time in mixed martial arts, but it is my number 3 on my greatest knockouts in the casual era of the UFC. 2 more to go. Tomorrow, I've got the number 2. The day after, I've got the number 1. Keen to talk about him. If you guys like what you see, like, subscribe, do what you got to do, because this train is going to keep on rolling. Until next time, gang, enjoy casuals.